Good morning, friends, and happy Friday. This is Lindsay Cross, Government Relations Director with Florida Conservation Voters. I hope you are all having a great week and looking forward to a restorative weekend coming up. As you can see, I'm wearing my vote shirt and my voting sticker, so want to make sure that all of you guys are getting your ballots in, have made a plan to vote. Tomorrow is the last day to request a mail-in ballot. There's also early voting locations all around the state. So make sure that you are voting, that you're checking the Florida Conservation Voters website for our endorsements, both on candidates and for ballot initiatives in local communities. So with that said, we're going to do a short update on the toll roads, the MCORS process, because this has been a very busy week and we are getting to the end of what has felt like a very long 15 months of this task force process. For those of you that are newer to the issue with the toll roads, the legislation that created the multi-use corridors of regional economic significance, or abbreviated as MCORS, was Senate Bill 7068, which was passed in 2019, signed into law by the governor in May of 2019. More than 100 organizations, including Florida Conservation Voters, opposed that bill or asked the governor to veto the bill. He did, in fact, sign the bill into law in May of 2019. Throughout this process, there has been significant concerns from organizations, businesses, and community members around the state because we know that this is a politically motivated project rather than something that's come from the community itself. And that was abundantly clear during the discussions during the task force meetings this week. The formal task force process started in August of 2019. There were 3 task forces assigned to evaluate, first of all, the need for new toll roads, the impact, the economic impact, the environmental impact, and some of the other concerns or issues related around the toll roads. That was a statutory requirement of the task forces, primarily to evaluate the need. As I mentioned, the task force process started in August of 2019 with a joint task force meeting in Tampa, Florida last year. Since that time, there have been regular meetings of the task forces with an end goal of transmitting a final report for each of the 3 task forces to be delivered to the governor and our legislative leaders by November 15th. And we are nearing that deadline. The 3 task forces are looking at 3 potential corridors throughout our state. The Southwest Central Corridor includes counties between Collier up into Polk County. There's a Suncoast Connector Task Force, which is looking at areas between Citrus County and Jefferson County, potentially up to the Georgia border. And then a smaller section in between, which is a 4-county area that would connect the current turnpike system with the Suncoast Parkway extension in Citrus County. Again, that's a 4-county area. So this week was the conclusion of the task force meetings. This was round number 9 for each of the meetings. And there were webinars that were held on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday that were facilitated by Department of Transportation and staff. Prior to this, the DOT had been developing draft final reports for consideration by the task forces. They also allowed for a very short 15-day public comment window for members of the public. And I wanted to thank the more than 2,000 conservation voters around the state that provided input on that and signed our petition to, again, ask for no bill to be a strong consideration and the only consideration of these MCORS roads. There were different components of the final reports. And I will continue to come back to the legislative charge that each of the 3 task forces were given. And I'd like to read that statement in particular, which comes directly from the legislation, because it is the foundation for this entire process. And if that goal cannot be met, nothing else is valid. So the legislative charge for each of the task forces was for each task force to evaluate the need for and the economic and environmental impacts of, hurricane evacuation impacts of, and land use impacts of the related corridor. The bottom line is that none of the task forces had the data or the information available due to a failure of the Department of Transportation to verify that there was a need for any of the 3 toll road corridors. It is clearly listed in the final reports that none of the task forces found the need for a new greenfield corridor, and in many cases, nor the upgrades of existing infrastructure. That means that there's not sufficient need to invest hundreds of millions of taxpayer dollars into completing this process and into the development of these destructive roads, which could span 330 miles throughout our state. So that is the most important thing. Each of the task force members were given a copy of the draft final report and given an even shorter window of time to present some amendments that would be discussed during the task force meetings. And that was a very long and arduous process. I do commend all the task force members for doing a thorough examination of it and submitting comments to DOT, which were then discussed by the task force members. This made for a very long series of meetings. In particular, the Southwest Central Task Force meeting, which was held on Monday, was a 14-hour meeting. I'll repeat that. It began at 9 o'clock in the morning. At 11 a.m., it finally concluded. The results of each of the 3 task forces was that they agreed not with the findings or the need for the road. They agreed merely to transmit a final report to the governor and legislative leaders. And there were significant concerns throughout the discussion. In particular, the group 1,000 Friends of Florida did not sign on to any of the task force reports because they felt that there was not enough protection of our natural environment, reduction of sprawl, or maintaining the rural character that is so important in many of our communities, that there were not enough considerations of that for them to sign on to the report. In 2 of the task forces, the Nature Conservancy also withheld their signing on to the report, and that was in the Southwest Central area and the Suncoast Connector. Apologize, there's just a cardinal that just flew onto my porch and is giving me a little fall greeting. Maybe it means that we'll get some cooler weather here finally. That would be nice. So as I mentioned, there was a lot of robust discussion throughout each of the meetings, and most of that was focused on the irreversible environmental damage that would come from creating these new roads, not only the roads themselves, but the induced development, the sprawl that would happen as a result of that. Within our state of Florida, we used to have a robust way of evaluating development plans. We had a Department of Community Affairs that looked at growth management in a more holistic way. During the Rick Scott administration, that program was dismantled, and some of those responsibilities were put onto the Department of Economic Opportunity, which, of course, the main objective of that group is to look at how to just increase money for developers and for special interests, rather than looking more holistically at how growth occurs within our state. So something like the MCORs becomes such a dangerous proposal when there is lack of leadership at the state level of being financially responsible with our taxpayer dollars, and there is a lack of strong growth management legislation. There was discussion about how home rule comes into play with decisions like this. If any of these new corridors, if there's any sections of these that are to be built, any new interchanges, there was discussion about the balance between having a larger statewide plan and a regional plan and allowing local communities to make decisions about land use plans and the type of development or the lack of development they would like to see. So those are going to continue to be considerations that we have to look at in any of our transportation plans. Again, I come back to the need for these roads. The Department of Transportation was never able to provide the data and the information to the task force members to validate why these new roads were needed. And therefore, the final reports are invalid because the whole framework for them was not successful. The hurricane impacts We know that the Department of Transportation was touting this as a way to evacuate people from our state. But our state has not taken a comprehensive statewide look at evacuation in more than 10 years. So it is irresponsible to be building some roads without knowing how best to meet the needs of our people, to keep them safe, and also be consistent with our state's emergency management department, which recommends primarily sheltering in your local community and not trying to have a mass exodus from our state. We also know that there are significant fiscal implications of a large infrastructure project of this level. DOT, again, has failed to provide meaningful data on what this would be costing our state and our taxpayers. And for those type of analysis, it really went to outside organizations, government watchdog groups like Florida Tax Watch, to do that work for them. Florida Tax Watch looked specifically at the Suncoast Connector Corridor and had very serious concerns about the financial viability of it and how it would be pulling money from other transportation projects within the Turnpike enterprise system, and really would be taking Turnpike revenue from other parts of the state, Central Florida, South Florida, Miami-Dade area, and using it to subsidize a road that is not needed in places where rural communities do not want that. So that fiscal component is an important consideration that, again, the DOT failed to provide the necessary backing for that, which again means that these reports should be rejected by our governor and our legislative leaders. There was suggestions by some of the task force members for DOT to come up with a very aggressive and proactive plan for land acquisition in advance of doing any upgrades to existing roads or any new greenfield corridor development. The Department of Transportation was not able to come up with anything definitive about how they would accomplish that. Rather, they committed to developing plans in the future, but we know that we cannot always rely on these promises. And so we do not have the assurances that some of our conservation lands that have already been protected, or those that are within the priority list of groups like the Florida Forever program, we do not have the assurances that those lands will be fully protected and kept from harm's way of these roads. So significant considerations there, and we believe that our natural systems, our conservation areas, our agriculture, and our water supply are still in danger through the MCORS process. Public comment was given at the beginning of these meetings, which was certainly for a 14-hour webinar. That was appreciated, but it did not allow for the public to directly respond to some of the amendments that were being presented in the discussions. When I presented my public comments, I tasked the task force members with thinking of themselves more as a jury member, with someone that was on trial. And as a jury member, you really only give a guilty verdict if you can do that without a shadow of a doubt. And I urged the task force members to keep that in mind as they were reviewing the amendments and they were reviewing the final report in its entirety. And if they had any shadow of a doubt that they should reject the final reports. That was mentioned in some of the comments as not being valid, but when you have something that it's going to affect the future of our state, our natural resources, and our budget priorities, we need to be crystal clear that these projects are needed and that they're addressing the needs of Floridians right now. We know that that is not the case. We are looking at several billions of dollars of budget shortfalls in the coming years due to the COVID-19 pandemic. We know that the governor in July vetoed more than $1 billion in projects, including more than $90 million of projects that address the infrastructure backlogs that we have and projects to improve our water quality. Those were did not get the funding that they needed, but yet the MCORS funding stayed intact and actually grew from $90 million to $117 million this year. we are asking through the Florida Conservation Voters and members of the No Build, the No Roads to Ruin Coalition, that we completely defund this program in the 2021 legislative year. We do not think that this is right for our state. The timing is horrible right now. Many of the task force members did recognize that this is a very abbreviated timeline for such a massive and unneeded infrastructure project. In the current legislation, SB 7068, it calls for construction of the roads to begin no later than December of 2022, and final construction of all of these roads to be done by 2030. That is irresponsible, and it's not attainable. In two of the task force reports, the Northern Turnpike and the Suncoast Connector, the task force members did recommend that the legislature either extend or completely eliminate the deadlines for this. We don't think that that's going far enough. We believe that the only way to protect what is valuable in our state, our water, our wildlife, our agriculture, our rural communities, and our taxpayer dollars, is to defund the MCORS project and put those into the priorities that Floridians value. The term no build is something that we within the No Roads to Ruin Coalition have been talking about since the beginning of the process. We know that that started to get traction. That is something that the DOT has said that this task force process was not meant to draw lines on a map or to make the final determination about where the roads would go, and that no build is always a consideration. But the task force members, again, were instructed to evaluate the need for the roads, which they were not able to do. They were not able to meet their legislative charge because of the failure of DOT and the legislature to have that information and to justify why this project is needed. The no build within the final reports, we feel was a little bit disingenuous the way Department of Transportation characterized it. For us, no build means that we're not destroying our natural environment in our rural communities. We have asked that some of the aspirational goals of MCORS, such as land acquisition, providing broadband to our rural communities, which we know is incredibly important, especially now that more people are working at home and doing virtual learning for their children and themselves. Broadband is something that all Floridians need and deserve access to. We also have considerable water quality problems that need to be addressed through things like upgrading our sewage and our septic infrastructure. And those were things that were tied in within the MCORS legislation and that rural communities were quite excited about. However, the way DOT defined no build in the final reports was that no build means no major capacity infrastructure upgrades, as well as no investments in land acquisition, broadband, or utilities. So that means for the rural communities in Florida to get the type of support that they need, they would have to be willing to have these roads or upgrades to their existing roads. And we just don't think that that's fair. We think that we should be investing in a better quality of life for all of our Floridians without strings attached, especially without the construction of these new toll roads. So what is this going to mean for us going forward? The task forces, as I mentioned, all three of the task forces, with the exception of a few of the entities, they did not come to a consensus. They could not justify that the roads were needed. They merely said that the reports were finalized and that they should be transmitted to the governor and the legislative leaders. And there is an importance in that language, that consensus was not reached, and the task forces merely recommended that the final reports be delivered or transmitted to the governor and the legislative leaders by November 15th. So that is an important consideration. And for those of us within the No Build, the No Roads to Ruin Coalition, and other concerned members of the public, we feel that that is a small win, but there is still significant work that needs to be done. I want to talk a little bit more about public comments, because that's something that has been an issue that we've been very concerned about throughout the process. DOT has received close to 10,000 public comments They have provided just kind of a cursory review of what those public comments were and put them into different bins, whether they were related to rural lifestyle or environmental concerns, but they were never able to come up with a collation or a synthesis of how many people were against the roads, how many of them were in favor of them, and how many maybe were still not clear. We think that is another failure of the Department of Transportation to be fully transparent throughout this process. So as a result of that, really an army of volunteers throughout the state associated with the No Roads to Ruin Coalition took it upon ourselves to make a public records request to painstakingly go through nearly 10,000 public comments and categorize them ourselves. What we found is that 93% of the comments were opposed to the roads. That totaled 9,232 comments. 3% of the people were unclear about the position, or we could not determine that, and only 4% were in favor of building the roads. We know that DOT went through those comments and put them into various categories. They could have taken that extra step. And we believe that if there were more people that were in support of the roads, that they would have certainly been sharing that information with the task force members and the public. So we feel that with something with such strong public opposition, that is reason enough that we halt the process, that we defund it, and we look for real ways to invest our taxpayer money. I alluded to the fact that this is an incredibly expensive undertaking. We've already invested hundreds of millions of dollars in our taxpayer dollars through this process. Some analyses suggest that building the complete M-Course project could cost more than $25 billion. And that's money that is just not an appropriate use of our funds at this time, especially as we have so many significant public health and community needs throughout our state. So those are some highlights from the meetings. I want to recognize some of the really strong task force members that were speaking up in support of our natural environment and our rural communities. I did mention that Thousand Friends did not sign on to the reports. The Nature Conservancy did not sign on to the Southwest Central or the Suncoast Connector one. Marion County and their commissioner, Kathy Bryant, also held very firm to the position of Marion County that they did not want this toll road to come through the county. If you remember, at the beginning of the process, Marion County was not included in the task forces. They were not included in that Northern Turnpike study area. And they merely wanted to be part of the process because they wanted to serve as watchdogs. Marion County has some significant farmland preservation area that they have put into their local comprehensive plan because it is something that the community has said, we want to maintain this rural community to it, the benefits that we get from these horse farms, from other agriculture. It is a significant source of unique in the state and makes them special. Towards the end of the Northern Turnpike meeting, there was the potential for Marion County to pull out of this thing entirely. Commissioner Kathy Bryant said that she would go back to the commission and seek a no-build resolution similar to one that was passed in Levy County and Alachua County. DOT made a concession and said that the road would not go through Marion County and that they would respect those wishes. So I think that speaks to the importance of having elected officials that are speaking not on behalf of their own interest or development or special interest, but speaking on behalf of the residents and the community members in their areas. We heard that loud and clear from Marion County, and I appreciate the strong advocacy from Marion County and from Sumter County as well. There was a question that someone just mentioned about Citrus County Commission. Citrus County has been very in support of the roads the entire time. I wrote an op-ed about a year ago specifically asking Citrus County to consider how their personal interests would impact the rest of the state. For those of you that have used one of the existing toll roads, the Veterans Highway or the Veterans Expressway in Hillsborough County does go up into, it becomes the extension of Suncoast and Suncoast Parkway 2 into Citrus County. Citrus County was concerned that if the MCORS process did not go forward, the continuation of that parkway would be halted as well. We know that there's been a lot of community planning that's gone into that work, going through DOT's normal planning process, which usually takes about 10 years between community members and groups like a commission or a metropolitan planning organization coming to DOT and saying, this is a need that we have in our community. How can we work collaboratively with you? This process, again, has been very top down of the legislature telling DOT and the task force members what they want to happen and then forcing them to back into it and justify why it's needed. Again, that justification did not come through because there is not a need or the economic backbone to support these new roads. So Citrus County has continued to advocate strongly for their own interest, and I think at the detriment of some of the regional things that are happening and how this could affect the community just north of them, Levy County, which requested no build in as opposed to the roads. So it is an interesting dance that we play when we work in task force processes, when we work in coalitions. I do feel like there was a strong level of respect within the discussions within the task force members. People were considerate of the positions that people had and were able to collaborate on the amendments and the discussion that happened. I do have concerns that the webinars were the length of the webinars. A 14-hour webinar is not something that's conducive to having the best discussion. I know that DOT was hell-bent on having a consensus on all of the reports, and their definition of that went anywhere from agreeing, strongly supporting, to agreeing not to oppose. And there's a lot of space between those things. And I know that there was feeling from some of the task force members that there was this expectation that they would sign on to the report merely because they had been part of the process. And that became apparent at the end of the meeting when task force members were asking, they're hungry, they need to use the restroom, and DOT is continuing to push forward with this process. We asked during when the pandemic was just starting and these meetings transferred from an in-person format to the webinars, we thought that this whole process needed to be halted until these discussions could be held in a more open way that engaged the public in a more transparent way. Of course, DOT and the legislature was not willing to put the brakes on that process as you as conservation voters asked for. And we think that it still was inappropriate that they pushed this through, really getting people at the point of fatigue where some may have been willing to just say, let's just finish this because we have to put our kids to bed and we need to get some sleep to wake up for meetings the next day. So I want to just check if there's other comments here in the comment box. I think that I've captured most of the questions, unless anyone else has some. Next steps going forward is that DOT will finalize the reports and they will send them to the governor, the legislative leaders, and that will happen on or by November 15th, which is a Sunday. Looking forward to the 2021 legislative session, we know that there are representatives that voted against Senate Bill 7068, including one of our senators, Jose Javier Rodriguez, who also voted against it. We will be looking for our allies within the conservation community to be looking at legislation that redirects the funding from MCORs to our priorities as Floridians, being able to make investments in our rural communities, bringing broadband, bringing infrastructure support in the form of water quality improvements, but without the strings attached that these toll roads represented. A question from Ginger asking about Collier County. Yes, quite disappointingly, the week before the final round of meetings, Collier County did pass a resolution in support of it. They did have some considerations about making sure that some of the conservation areas were not impacted. But I do want to come back to the several communities, Levy County, Alachua County, and the Cedar Key, that did pass no build resolutions, and we are grateful for their leadership on those efforts. So while this is nearing the end of the 15-month task force process, that's really the beginning of our continued advocacy against the roads and our advocacy for the things that we want as Floridians. And that's protection of our water, our wildlife, our agriculture, our rural communities, and our taxpayer dollars. So I would like to thank everyone who has been so engaged, that's been fighting this fight with us. Again, 10,000 comments that came in just on our letter opposing the final reports a couple weeks ago, the draft final reports. We had more than 2,000 conservation voters who signed that petition. We can't thank you enough. We know that many of you have written comments directly to DOT. You've spent your time attending task force meetings and giving public comment. Many of you have written letters to the editor or op-eds. You've shared our action alerts. You participated in webinars. You have talked with your friends and your neighbors. You have talked with your elected officials and asked them their position on the destructive toll roads. And we can't thank you enough for that. We will continue to keep you updated on this because, again, the fight, and this is not over. We will always be fighting for what Floridians value. And at this point, I think the most important thing that we can do is make sure that everyone is voting, that you are looking over your ballots, your sample ballots, making sure that you are informed whether you're going to the polls early, whether you're going to be there on November 3rd with your mask on and a big smile on your face, whether you're mailing in your ballot or dropping it off in one of the secure ballot locations. Again, Florida Conservation Voters is so grateful and honored to be able to endorse a whole slew of amazing candidates, both incumbents and new upcoming leaders in our state. There are 6 conservation ballot initiatives that would help to support water quality or public land protection. Those are ballot initiatives that we would love for you to review. Things in Collier County, in Manatee County, in Volusia County, and Orange County. There's also other amendments that we have taken a position on, and we would love for you to take the time and visit our website. And again, make your plan to vote. Tomorrow is the last day to request your mail-in ballot. Make sure you get out there and make your voice heard. We appreciate you, our conservation community. Have a wonderful Friday, a wonderful weekend, and we will talk to you all soon.